Hi, I'm Isabel Sobral Campos from Northeastern University, and I'll be reading The Ecology of Listening, Emerging Soundscapes and the Limits of Audibility. Roland Barthes tells us that listening speaks. Linked to modernity, this type of listening relates to how subjects are called upon to listen without expectations openly to another's desire, and as such become embroiled in power dynamics. I take up today the question of listening from the perspective of the lyric, and while my claims are not tied up with a modern subject, they do propose the speaking silence, a listening speech. As an aesthetic category independent of the study of performance, listening has perhaps not yet been explored with the same force within studies of poetics or ecopoetics. Thus, I focus here on the lyric construction of sound, that is, the dynamism of white space or black noise and word space utterances. This construction suggests the multiple ways that poems are acts of deep listening. A term coined by Paulino Oliveros to refer to a practice that seeks to bring attention and awareness to the prolific range of sounds in all environments, a kind of meditative sonic practice that enhances our awareness of what often remains unnoticed in the background. The black noise, or the limits of audibility within a poem, conditions the lyric construction of sound and enables the possibility of lyric dwelling, which entails an awakening to this limit on which poetry hangs. Black noise being a term used to refer to the almost absence of noise. And the limits of audibility that sustain the architecture of a poem includes also a barely perceptible slush, the buzz of organism. So there is the listening of the poem, a listening to indices and signs, and the listening to a poem, the speech of listening. To buzz with disclosure, the listening of a poem. One of the oldest extant Sumerian tablets in cuneiform script recounts the return of the shepherd Dumuzi from among the dead. The story is linked to perhaps a more famous account of how the goddess Inanna chose her lover Dumuzi to be taken in her place, so she could escape the underworld. Since Dumuzi failed to mourn her properly, Inanna judged it a fair exchange. But later, the lament of Sirtud, Dumuzi's mother, and Geshtinana, Dumuzi's sister, softens Inanna's disposition and causes a change of heart. Eventually, Inanna finds Dumuzi again and forges a bargain. Half of the year he must dwell in the underworld, and the other half freely on earth. Geshtinana will take Dumuzi's place below while he is gone. Both in the account in which Inanna narrowly escapes the underground and in the telling of Dumuzi's return, flies have a decisive part to play. Let me begin with a fly in Dumuzi's return. Moved by Geshtinana's lamentation, Inanna concedes, "Your brother's house is no more. Dumuzi has been carried away by the gala. I would take you to him, but I do not know the place." In this moment of impasse, quote, a fly appeared. This resourceful fly, which initiates a series of events leading to Dumuzi's salvation, is described also as the holy fly. We are told that it circled the air above Inanna's head and spoke, "If I tell you where Dumuzi is, what will you give me?" The fly speaks the location of Dumuzi's corpse, which is paradoxically living. He is found weeping, and from then on the Musi occupies the function for which he has been destined, spending half of the year in the underworld. What renders the fly and the Musi visible, if not a buzzing, the noise of presence? What determines appearance, if not the fly's indexical pointing, which is sound surrounding a corpse? The buzzing is an index, a sign, and points to the corpse as index of rebirth. As soon as the corpse is found, resurrection occurs. The sonic transference from fly to location, from fly to material, i.e. corpse, accomplishes this rebirth. The sonic labor of the fly exemplifies how sound operates, how it can disclose and reveal, and how it is central for the lyric function. The listening of the poem has the ability to uncover, through the mechanism of sound, what seemingly appears invisible. The lyric balancing of sound makes environments salient, noticeable, distinct. In other words, it allows for the all around and within to appear. The side of a poem is only as deep and wide as its soundscape sketches. Sound suggests place as indices, signs, traces of breath, and so draws the line between living and non-living. But also, an attention to sound qua sound highlights the function of poetic speech and brings us close to how a lyric obtains a proximity to environments. To create the conditions for lyric dwelling is to place oneself in relation to life, to buzz with disclosure. The buzzing, central to the fly as organism, links the world of gods and humans. So both this account and in Inanna's descent to the underground, the fly traces a path toward and from death, toward and from what is inaccessible. In Inanna's descent, two flies enter the impenetrable world of the great below and initiate a chain of events that allows for the goddess to return from the underground. Enki fashions two creatures from dirt, a Kurgaha and a Galatur, and orders them to enter the underworld like flies. Once inside, they are instructed to repeat the moaning words of Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, who is suffering the pangs of birth. Thankful for the empathetic chorus that the flies provide, the queen offers them a gift in return. They ask for the corpse that hangs from the hook on the wall, the corpse of Inanna, and so succeed in snatching her away from the great below. The buzzing flies modulate human affect. Quote, "Who are you moaning, groaning, sighing with me?" Ereshkigal asks the flies. Sound is a vehicle of a furtive conquest, of how Inanna's corpse resurrects. It is also what pierces through the unmoved determination of Ereshkigal. While Inanna may not enter and leave the underworld at her leisure, the flies come and go. Their sonic ability places them between worlds, so their knowledge and motility is a traffic between states. Master the secret of the fly, and you will conquer even death. For the fly is steeped in initiatory rituals, which is an ancient way of describing the feedback loops of ecology. The circular repetition of action, the stylized authorization of form is an imprint of an observational knowledge that connects flora, fauna, and geology. What does sound entail and what listening, which makes both permeable? One way to think of sound is through resonance, or the ways in which listening bounces back and forth, even within a single listening ear. As Jean-Luc Nancy writes, listening opens itself up to resonance, and that resonance opens itself up to the self. That is, to say both, that it opens to self, to the resonant body, to its vibrations, and that it opens to the self, to the being just as its being is put into play for itself. Resonance is the space of sound, the way sound returns to itself as it materializes. Sound begins by differentiating itself so it can affirm itself as sound. It rests with its own singularity. A beat, a single sound, is the fading of its ring, the fanning out to itself. So a sound is primary sentience. It begins by listening to its own beat. As living forces, the courgard and the galateur, appearing as flies, suggest this foundational sentience of sound. The buzzing of the fly is a projection of resonance, or of how the experience of sound entails a rupture, without which consciousness could not become present for itself. Sound bleeds outward. It requires a recognition of its spatial ceasing. In this recognition, life begins. The muses corpse is discovered. A new ontological structure founded. Inanna is reborn. To buzz with disclosure, then listening to the poem. Poets have often named listening as central to how a poem emerges and to what a poem does. For instance, John Burnside writes, in short, poetry as a discipline must be seen as a mixed faculty sensibility, an attempt first at awareness, a listening, and then at speech, whether that speech be audible or not. Francis Ponge explains that, for my part, if I examine myself writing, I never come to write the slightest phrase without my writing being accompanied by a mental speaking and listening. In Drift, Caroline Bergvall reflects, insistent methods in art are intimately connected to processes of receiving and of following. One loads one's vessels for dream travel, and one follows it into hell. A reciting voice remains simultaneously input and output. Resonance is contact ripple. Everything is connected in the vast chamber of the world, beyond the callous, brutal politics. Everything ripples at contact. While in these statements listening is conceived differently depending on how the poet positions it within poetic creation, in all three instances listening forges a connective tissue between the input and output, between the recording of a word and the sending it outward. Awareness of or listening reveals the contact ripple, which is how a poem shows that everything is connected. The act of listening is latent within the lyric. Another side always folds into presence. Internally hearing or speaking a poem aloud creates a doubling. Each word is an echo of a reply, a speaking and a listening. In a poem, the written word resists silence. The poem listens to what it sounds out and what it is ushered in between sound. It echoes in the tense silence between words. It renders perceptible a kind of black noise, the background of the poem being utterly necessary for the foreground vibration made of words. The poem operates in an immersive ecology whereby the poem's full apprehension occurs through an awareness of what is left out, to the limits of audibility gurgling inside a poem. It listens to its environment, which is a linguistic web, but also a collated breath of word space and white space. How does the poem listen to the environment, to what is both within and around a body? It first listens to its own echoing, to the listening of another, but in that doubling it functions as a sensor for the as yet inaudible sound, the black noise of the forgotten body. An attentive listening reveals the background, closing the gap between what is within and around, so a poem swells as the contact ripple. Alice Notley creates a haunting narrative for this happening where sentience is an awareness that occurs within sound, and the location of that sentience is the sonic liberation of what surrounds a body. In part 1 of The Descent of Alette, still confined to the subway, one of Alette's first experiences of transformation occurs, and in it, collective blood hums. There is something in my ear. I pull it out, a white cord, a long silk cord. I pull it out and hear our blood. It hums, a unison one, note loud, a sheet of sound. It hangs there, sad insect noise, insect-like, our blood. In the listening to a poem, awareness enacts dissolution, a washing outward into the everything of drift, water resonance. The insect-like sound of blood figures as a sheet, a cloak of sound. It carries with it foremost the collective, which is in this poem an experience filtered through an eye, shifting in episodic metamorphosis, the way divine forces alone may shift. Humming blood with sad insect noise resembles the lowest denominator of existence, that bare life of black noise, the threshold of audibility, but also the internal slushing of blood that vibrates in the insect-like. And so is the fly, one sign for the primal sound of organic life. Sound and glues what is left unattended and blends it to what lays obviously present. The resulting unification is the experience of immersion, of being in a body, speaking a sound, or of uttering a poem. But also, we die of the same kind of death as the flies, writes Ethel Adan. We are as large as the smallest. We are always at the verge of disappearing, and so is everything, both and around and within, that at any point may cease to be intelligible. The ephemerality of sound is a sign of this precarity. We too are resonance listening to itself. Life is a buzzing vibrancy, and vibrancies coalesce together in a network of sound. A poem represents a constellation of vibrations, and the black noise of the soundless space between words serves as the cosmic background for environs. Is the sounding of words then a buzzing, insect-like, and is the lyric construction of sound bringing us closer to that organic buzz of body? Is this why the spaced silences in a poem are filled with a tentative black noise, where the poem is littered with sound and its limits of audibility? The fine appreciation of a poem's hums can reveal the spine of sound holding it all together. The buzzing of a poem is how it calls to the organic, while simultaneously implicating us in its own organicity. Thank you.